Welcome, everyone, to the 10-minute Bible lesson. We appreciate you joining us today. Today, we're going to be looking at verse 13. That is Matthew chapter 6, verse 13. It's the last verse in the Lord's Prayer. And to be more accurate, we're not going to be looking at the whole verse. We're just going to be looking at the first half of it. Why don't we go ahead and read that? Again, that's in Matthew chapter 6, verse 13. Here's what it says. And do not lead us into temptation. Now remember, this is the Lord's Prayer. He's teaching us to pray. Do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Now, in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus is giving us a guide for prayer. And the reason he's doing that is to help us to know, how and what we could pray about. I think that's pretty nice of him, don't you? In fact, I think that we need for him to do that. And so that's kind of what he's doing. So last time, we were looking at the previous verse, I believe verse 12, and in that Jesus was teaching us about what to pray and how to pray, and he was talking about praying for our daily provisions. I don't know if you remember or not, but in that verse it said this, give us this day our daily bread. And also in that verse he was teaching us about having our debts forgiven. So he said, forgive us of our debts as we forgive our debtors. Now today we're looking at his teaching. He's teaching us to ask God in our prayers to help us not to be led into temptation. And I think that's something that's really important, and that we not be led into the hands of the evil one. He's actually telling us that we should be praying about that. And I certainly think that's important. So there are some things that we could do that I believe that would be helpful for us not to be led in temptation. Now let me just say this, being in temptation itself is not necessarily a sin, but it's when we yield and when we give into the temptation, that's where the sin happens. And there are some things, in fact, I want to share them with you today, 3 things that I believe are really, really helpful that would help us not to get led into temptation. Now, I'm not saying that I do all of these and do all of them perfectly, but I just think it's a good rule for me to go by and for all of us to go by. Now, the first one would be this, to be careful about what we put before our eyes. Now, remember when our children were little, we used to sing this little song, oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Well, listen, that's not just for children, it's for God's children, for all of us. And I think it's a really, really good thing. Now, what could we do to help us to be careful not to put ourselves in a place of temptation that has to do with our eyes? Because our eyes are like a gateway that allows things to come in. And I would just say this, one of the things we could do, or we may think about doing, is, controlling our phones. Or maybe we could put something on our phones to prevent certain things from coming up. Or maybe also in our laptops or on our televisions. I know that Job said this, he said, I've made a covenant with my eyes. Why then should I look upon a maid? The second thing I think that we could do is to be careful where we go. That is to say, be careful the places or the locations that we end up. Think about it before you go to this place. Is this place going to be a place that may cause me to yield to temptation? Maybe it's a place where liquor and drugs are flowing and other things are going. Do I really want to put myself in that position or in that location? And the third thing is to be careful who I go with. We need to be careful about the people that we run around with. And that is to say, is the person that I'm going to go with, are they going to lead me into a situation where it might cause me to yield to temptation? I think these are really important things that we ought to think about. And so important that Jesus tells us we ought to pray about it, that we not be led into temptation. Now I have another verse for you. It's an excellent verse And this verse is actually in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, and it has to do with temptation. This is what the Apostle Paul said. See if we can learn something from this verse. He said, "No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape that you may be able to bear it." It's a great verse. It's really a great verse. There's a lot of information in here. The first thing I notice in this verse is that when sometimes we think we're the only one being tempted in this way. And that this verse tells us that that's not necessary. That's not so. In fact, he tells us this. He says that it's common. Temptation is common to everyone. So I think that's an important thing to know, that what's happened to us in temptation is also other people are being tempted as well. Now, the second thing I notice in this verse, and it tells us real plainly that God is faithful. Now, what is he faithful about? Well, he's faithful that he'll not allow us to be tempted above which we're able. And he's faithful in that, and I think that's really important. Now, the third thing I think is really, really important, and that is that God will provide a way of escape. So he says here, he says, not that you be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape that you may be able to bear. So I think that's really, really important. Is there a way out for me? Is there a door that's unlocked that I could go in that will help me to escape the temptation? So when we're under the temptation and we think we're going to yield, look for the way of escape. I think that's just really, really important that we should do this. So Jesus is teaching us that it should be a matter of prayer. So none of us are strong enough. There's not any of us that have the power and the ability to allow us to somehow overcome all temptation. We can't do that. And that's why Jesus is teaching us that we're supposed to pray. So we should be careful in whatever situation that we're in, not to allow it to be to tempt us. So listen, who wants to be delivered into the hand of the evil one? So that's what Jesus said. He said, "Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one." Well, listen, I certainly want to be delivered from the evil one, but I need help and I need assistance, and you might even say divine assistance. And I know Jesus knew that we needed that. Even his apostles needed that. And I want to share a scripture with you. Actually, it's two verses that Jesus told Peter. Peter had some hard times as well. And here's what Jesus said in Luke 22, verses 31 and 32. "And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, indeed Satan has asked for you." That's kind of scary. "That he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail. And when you have returned to me, strengthen your brethren." So that was one of the apostles. So we know Peter denied Jesus, right? Even when he said he would not do it, he even said that no, everyone may do it. I'm not going to do it. But we know that he did. But he was able to recover from that fall and from that temptation that he yielded to by the grace of God. And I notice in this verse that Jesus said this, "But I have prayed for you." And I don't know if you've ever thought about that or not, that Jesus prayed for Peter. Do you think that Jesus prays for you? Perhaps he does, because now we know he's at the right hand of the Father, making intercession for you and for me. And so it's very possible that Jesus is saying prayers for us. Wouldn't you love to hear Jesus say a prayer for you? So what did he pray? What is it that he prayed for Peter about? That his faith wouldn't fail. Isn't that interesting? And you know what? Peter's faith didn't fail. He didn't give up, and he finally returned. And Jesus said, when you do that, you can strengthen your brethren. That's a wonderful verse. And I'm thankful for for this Lord's Prayer, that He tells us things that we could pray about, because sometimes we don't know, and He just gives us some excellent ideas about what to pray for. So we appreciate you tuning in. Now, next week will be the last one that we're going to be doing on the Lord's Prayer. We're going to be doing the last half of verse 13. But thank you for joining us today. I hope you have a really good week.